There's a part of you you don't talk about. Not to your friends, not to your partner, maybe not even to yourself. You feel it in passing, in flashes of desire, moments of shame, or fantasies that don't make sense. Carl Jung had a name for this, and once you understand it, you'll start to see why so much of your life feels divided. This is the truth about your sexual shadow. And it's not what you think. You've done everything right, or at least everything you were told to do. You've grown, you've healed, you've read the books, had the conversations, maybe even gone to therapy. You know what boundaries are. You can articulate your feelings. You know how to be emotionally safe, sexually responsible, mentally mature, and yet there's something underneath it all that doesn't feel integrated. It's not easy to describe. It's not even easy to notice. It shows up in quiet ways, in the way your body goes numb during intimacy, or how you reach for validation right after feeling desire. It shows up in the way you pull away when someone gets too close, or chase someone who never truly sees you. It's subtle, slippery. It doesn't look like trauma. It doesn't scream for help, but it lives in your life all the same, in your routines, in your fantasies, in your silence. You feel like something is missing, but you can't point to what. You feel like you should want sex more or less, but you can't tell which impulse is real and which one is just programmed. You feel split between the person you perform and the one you can only meet in your dreams. This isn't dysfunction, this is fragmentation, because you're not broken, you're divided. And what's been divided isn't just your body and your mind. It's your desire and your identity. It's the part of you that still flinches at your own want, the part of you that shuts down when you feel too much, the part of you that doesn't know how to be fully seen without fearing what comes next. Most people don't talk about this, not even in therapy, not even with themselves, because desire, especially the kind that feels strange, overwhelming, or socially unacceptable, gets pushed down fast and early. Not just the physical impulses, but the emotions tied to them, the need to be held, the craving to be known, the fear of losing control, the fantasy of giving it up. It's not always about sex. It's about what sex awakens in you: power, vulnerability, exposure, shame, the fear of being too much or not enough. So instead of facing it, we perform, we intellectualize, we keep things healthy, we focus on techniques, tools, communication strategies, and we call that growth. But somewhere underneath all the maturity and mindfulness, you still feel the gap. The part of you that longs for something you don't know how to name. The part that wants to feel without censoring, to want without guilt, to be touched not just physically, but existentially. This is where the sexual shadow begins, not with lust, but with absence. The absence of language, the absence of safety, the absence of permission. And when something as central as desire is treated like a threat, you learn to split yourself just to survive. You become two people, the one who's acceptable and the one who has to stay hidden. But hidden doesn't mean gone, it means exiled. And what's exiled eventually returns, not as the original feeling, but as its distorted echo, as compulsion, as avoidance, as numbness, as confusion, as intensity you can't explain. Carl Jung understood this. He wasn't moralistic about it. He didn't shame people for their impulses. He simply observed, when something is pushed into the unconscious, it doesn't disappear. It waits, it grows, it mutates, until your very effort to suppress it becomes the source of your suffering. And this is why so many people feel so tired. Not from sex, not from trauma, but from the effort it takes to keep their desire in check. Desire that was never integrated in the first place. Desire that was silenced before it had a chance to speak. Desire that became a stranger inside your own skin. You didn't start by hiding your desire. You learned to. Not through one dramatic moment, but through 1,000 subtle ones. a glance that lingered too long and made an adult uncomfortable, a question about your body met with silence, a feeling in your chest or between your legs that had no name, just a sudden sense of shame. No one had to say the words out loud. You felt it in their tone, in the way they changed the subject, in the way they told you to be appropriate, to cover up, to not act that way. That's how it begins, not with evil, with fear. Fear inherited from generations, fear dressed up as morality, as safety, as love. So you did what every child does. You adapted. You buried what felt dangerous, not just to others but to your belonging. And the cost of that adaptation wasn't just confusion, it was division. Because repression isn't forgetting, it's fragmentation. What you pushed down didn't disappear. It became a separate version of you, sealed off, unspoken, unmanaged. A psychic orphan, still alive, still pulsing, still influencing you, but now from the dark. This is the root of the sexual shadow. Not deviance, not dysfunction, but disconnection. Disconnection from the parts of you that once felt natural, instinctive, embodied. And once those parts were exiled, you were left to fill the gap. With control, with performance, with a curated version of desire that felt safe enough to present to the world, even if it never quite reached your core. Because what you perform isn't always what you feel, and what you feel doesn't always make it to the surface, especially if you were taught that feeling too much is dangerous. This is why people live double lives, why some chase intensity while others go numb, why healthy sex can still feel hollow, why intimacy can trigger panic more than pleasure. The shadow isn't some abstract mystical force. It's the part of you that was made to feel unsafe, then left behind. It's not evil, it's exiled life. Jung didn't say we should indulge our shadows blindly. He said we must make them conscious, because the unconscious doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't care that you read the right books or follow the right accounts. It only knows energy, and the energy you repress will find a way out. That's why people sabotage good relationships, why they feel inexplicably drawn to people who aren't safe, why they intellectualize connection until their body no longer responds. It's not logic, it's the architecture of repression. And the longer you pretend that structure is sustainable, the more your body and soul start to revolt. Not loudly, quietly, in the subtle ways you stop expecting to be moved. In the gradual numbness you begin to call adulthood. That's not wisdom, that's repression calcified into identity. You think you're making choices, you think your desires are yours. But beneath every decision there's a blueprint you didn't design. You scroll through profiles, but no one feels quite right. You touch someone's skin, but you feel a little farther from yourself. You chase people who don't see you. You pull away from the ones who do. And you tell yourself stories that you're too much, that you're not enough, that you're just not in the mood, that it's the wrong time, the wrong person, the wrong body, the wrong life. But what if it's not about who you're with? What if it's about the part of you that's still underground? The sexual shadow doesn't announce itself, it leaks. It appears in contradictions you can't explain, like wanting someone intensely, then resenting them the moment they want you back. Or feeling numb until you're rejected, then overwhelmed by need. Or losing all interest the second things become emotionally safe. This isn't immaturity. It's the nervous system trying to negotiate a trauma it can't name. The shadow comes out sideways, in compulsive fantasies, unexplained shame, performance that leaves you feeling empty, silence that feels like safety but tastes like grief. Sometimes it looks like overindulgence. Sometimes it looks like total withdrawal, but underneath both is the same pattern. A part of you wants to feel. Another part has been trained to fear that feeling, so you stay stuck in a loop, chasing what wounds you, avoiding what might actually meet you, confusing intensity for intimacy, calling numbness peace. This is what happens when desire is never given a safe home. It wanders, it becomes hungry, distorted, obsessive. Or it shuts down quietly and you stop expecting anything real. You might still have sex, you might even be in a relationship, but the contact feels filtered, muted, like you're watching yourself from the outside. You're there, but not fully. You're touching, but not feeling. You're present, but not open. And over time, you start to think this is just how life is. You convince yourself that passion fades, that mystery dies, that being an adult means being emotionally neutral, sexually steady, spiritually unshaken. But that's not maturity, that's anesthesia, a symptom of what happens when you've spent so long trying to manage your desire that you forget what it feels like to trust it. Because when the sexual shadow remains unintegrated, you don't stop feeling, you just stop recognizing yourself in what you feel. You start reacting to people as projections, mirrors for the parts of you you're still afraid of. You judge the ones who embody your hidden self. You crave the ones who echo your suppression. You fear the ones who might actually see you. This is the descent, not into darkness, but into contradiction, where the very thing you long for becomes the thing you avoid, where the parts of you that want to come home have to sneak in through fantasy, sabotage, and silence. It's not your fault, it's your psyche trying to complete itself. And the longer you ignore it, the louder it gets, until one day it shows up in ways you can't control. In the relationship that unravels without reason, in the affair you swore you'd never have, in the emptiness you can't explain to your partner, in the ache that never goes away, no matter how many books you read or how many rules you follow. Jung warned us about this. What you do not make conscious will come back as fate. The sexual shadow doesn't destroy you through chaos. It destroys you through misalignment, through a life that looks fine on the outside, but feels like someone else's on the inside. That's the true descent. When you can no longer tell if what you're living is yours. When most people hear sexual shadow, they imagine extremes. They think of impulse, addiction, secrets, scandal. But the truth is quieter than that. The shadow isn't asking to take over, it's asking to be heard. That's where integration begins. Not with permission to indulge, but with permission to feel. To let your desire speak in a voice that isn't distorted by guilt or filtered through shame. To ask yourself, not what do I want to do, but what is this part of me trying to tell me? Most people assume that facing their desire means giving into it. But Jung never said to obey the shadow. He said to enter into relationship with it. Because once you understand what the shadow is protecting, the urgency starts to soften. The compulsions lose their grip. The fear becomes information. The shame begins to melt into something older, more human. Grief, maybe, or longing. You begin to see that desire, even when messy, isn't your enemy. It's the voice of a self you weren't allowed to become, and that self doesn't need to be acted out. It needs to be welcomed. You don't have to perform it. You don't have to confess it to everyone. You just have to stop exiling it. Because when you repress a part of yourself, it doesn't stop existing. It starts negotiating. It whispers through your fantasies. It builds tension in your body. It inserts itself into your decisions, subtly altering your direction until you don't recognize the life you've created. But when you bring it into consciousness, when you listen without judgment, feel without agenda, something shifts. You begin to act from awareness, not reaction. You stop needing desire to shock you awake. You stop fearing what you want. You stop moralizing every impulse as either sacred or shameful. And for the first time, perhaps, you start to feel what it's like to be whole. Not perfect, not pure, just undivided. because that's what integration really is. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that were never allowed to grow. The part that felt too much. The part that wanted too badly. The part that was punished, silenced, ignored. That's not just sexuality. That's your life force, your vitality, your connection to self, to others, to presence. And when you bring that part in from the cold, everything changes. You don't become reckless. You become rooted. You don't become chaotic. You become conscious. You no longer need to prove your worth through performance. You don't chase intensity to feel alive. You stop using sexuality to escape and start experiencing it as presence. This is emergence, not out of darkness, but into complexity, into contradiction, into the kind of truth that can hold both desire and discernment without splitting them apart. There's a grief people carry that doesn't look like grief. It doesn't cry, it doesn't speak, it just weighs. It shows up in low desire, in relationships that feel more like maintenance than intimacy, in the quiet fear that something essential has slipped away and you're not sure when or if it will return. We call it stress, we call it maturity, we call it being too busy, too tired, too logical. But what if it's not fatigue? What if it's not dysfunction? What if it's grief for the parts of you you never got to live? Grief for the rawness that had to be polished away, for the instincts that were labeled inappropriate, for the moments you were too ashamed to name, too scared to feel, too young to understand. That's the cost of avoidance, not chaos, absence, the absence of aliveness, the absence of surprise, the absence of being moved by touch, by connection, by the electric honesty of desire that doesn't apologize for existing. Over time, that absence becomes normal. You adapt to it. You tell yourself this is what love looks like. This is what adulthood is supposed to feel like. You dim slowly and call it peace. But deep down, some part of you knows that the fire inside you didn't die, it was buried, that what you called control was just silence, that what you called evolution was just disconnection in disguise. This isn't about rekindling lust, it's about reclaiming presence, because when you avoid the shadow, you don't just avoid pain, you avoid your power, your intuition, your embodied wisdom. You stop trusting your own desire, not because it betrayed you, but because you were never taught how to listen to it. So you either obey it blindly or mute it completely. But both paths lead to the same place, disempowerment, because power isn't domination and desire isn't danger. They only become that way when left unconscious. And if you've spent years running from your sexual shadow, through productivity, through performance, through pretending to be healed, you're not alone. You were trying to protect something sacred, but protection without awareness becomes isolation, and isolation becomes identity, until you wake up one day in a life that looks fine, but feels like someone else's. That's the slow erosion, the invisible cost. Not the drama of rupture, but the quiet ache of unrealized connection. Not a breakdown, a drifting. You don't crash, you fade. And what fades isn't just passion, it's presence. Integration isn't about fixing yourself. It's about reclaiming the parts you were taught to fear. The part of you that wanted too much. The part that felt too alive, too curious, too open. The part that learned to shrink itself just to be loved safely. Carl Jung never said your shadow should rule you. He said it should be known, seen, integrated. Because when you repress desire, you don't erase it. You exile it. And anything exiled doesn't die. It waits. It waits to be felt, to be listened to without judgment, to be welcomed, not for what it does, but for what it knows. Your sexual shadow carries a history of silence, but beneath that silence is a language you were never taught. The language of energy, of intuition, of truth that lives beneath performance. When you begin to listen, really listen, something changes. You stop acting out. You stop shutting down. You start asking better questions. What am I actually feeling? What is this impulse protecting? What memory lives underneath this reaction? That's not indulgence, that's awareness. And awareness is how the shadow softens, how it moves from being something that controls you to something that deepens you. Because the more you understand it, the more you begin to trust yourself, not just as someone who manages desire, but as someone who relates to it with presence, nuance, and respect. This isn't about turning your shadow into a virtue. It's about turning toward it as a mirror. The sexual shadow isn't just about what you want, it's about who you became, in response to what you were told you couldn't be. So now the question isn't how to get rid of it, it's how to live with it, how to learn from it, how to build a relationship with the parts of you that still feel unsafe, unspoken, unseen, and maybe most importantly, what truth is your desire trying to tell you that you were never allowed to hear?